Okay. One thing I will point out is you might like to go into the video tutorials link here, which you might not know exists, and come and watch some of these how it works videos. Particularly, come and watch the armor video, because that will explain a lot about how AP interacts with armor. Okay, so that will give you some of the background and some of the mechanics I'm about to talk about. Okay, Overmatch. So the way that Overmatch works, let me find a battleship. So I'm assuming you're somewhere around about, let's say, tier 6, let's say America, let's say you are in a New Mexico. Okay. So there are two pieces of information that you need to know. And generally when we're talking about Overmatch, we're talking about the nose of a ship, not necessarily battleships. So the first piece of information you need to know is the armor plating thickness of the thing that you are shooting at. So let's just make it easy and say that New Mexico is shooting New Mexico, just to make it nice and easy.
Brand new tier 1 sub.
Hey,
welcome, Luz and Seb.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. You didn't have to do that. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, standard tier 6 battleship armor is 26 millimeters. New Mexico is literally covered in it. So if a New Mexico is nose to nose with a New Mexico, then you're presenting 26 millimeter plating. Now with Overmatch, the angle of this is really important. The angle of the plating does not matter. Once you get beyond Overmatch and you're trying to work out whether you just pen or not, then angle becomes important. And to go and watch one of those videos, go and watch that armor video to find out about how ricochet angles work. But in terms of Overmatch, it works like HE pen. So if I go and look at my HE pen here, there's underneath the HE shell listing there's 59 millimeters, which is a fixed amount that never changes. And so if I'm shooting HE at another ship, I always pen 59 millimeters. It doesn't matter about the distance. It doesn't matter about the angle of the plate that I'm shooting. Overmatch works the same way, but the value isn't listed in the port for some reason that I cannot understand. No, good night, Joe. For some reason that I cannot understand, AP Overmatch is not in the port, and it should be. But you can calculate it. So the way that you calculate Overmatch is, do you have a pen? Because you'll need to write this down. 356 millimeters. Yes, exactly. 356 millimeters divided, so it's the caliber of the gun, divided by 14.3. It's always 14.3. That never changes. That is true for all classes. Okay, unlike 8E pen, which has a different value depending on which ship you're in. So 14.3. So if you do that calculation, 356 divided by 14.3, and you can do it the other way around as well, you get 24.895. There's no rounding, so that is the amount of millimeters that you pen. You pen 24.895 millimeters. So is that enough to go through 26 millimeters? No, it is not, because 24.895 is smaller than 26, and therefore you cannot overmatch yourself in a New Mexico. Okay? If you take a different battleship, so you take one that has 400 plus millimeter guns, then there are some of those at tier 6 and 7, then yes, they can. So if I take a Nelson, for example, let me change to Nelson. Pretty classic example. Unfortunately, I think no longer available. So tier 6 and 7 have this interesting situation where half the battleships overmatch the other half, and half of them don't. And so you need to start learning which ones are which. So 406 millimeters does overmatch 26. If I just quickly do the calculation, 406 divided by 14.3 is 28.39. So that does overmatch 26. And so a Nelson, which has a 26 millimeter nose, standard tier 6, tier 7 armor scheme, does overmatch itself and the New Mexico. Okay, so if you have a New Mexico and a Nelson nose to nose and they're shooting AP at each other, the Nelson will overmatch the New Mexico will not overmatch the Nelson. Does that make sense? If you want to know what caliber of gun overmatches your armor, you just do the calculation in reverse. So you take 26 millimeters and you multiply by 14.3. So 26 millimeters multiplied by 14.3 factor is 371.8. So 371 millimeter guns will not overmatch. 372 millimeter guns will overmatch. Yeah, pretty much. So if you're around tier 6, 7, it can get quite confusing because, as I said, like pretty much half and half. Half of the ships fall under that barrier and half of them fall over the barrier. Armor schemes aren't quite as simple as they used to be. It's not just the case that all of the battleships have 26 mil at tier 6 and 7. So you might have to check because some of the battle cruisers now have cruiser armor. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're a 356 millimeter battleship, you're not going to overmatch. And if you're a 406 and you're shooting same tier, then you are going to overmatch. That is not true at tier 8 to 10. The standard battleship armor at tier 8 to 10 is 32 millimeters, and there are not many battleships in the game that can overmatch 32 millimeters. So you're talking about Musashi and Yamato and those kind of big caliber ships. So 460 and above. The 457 millimeter guns on like Vermont, for example, cannot do that. Okay, does that make sense? So yeah, you can always calculate your overmatch value, and it should be listed. Like it should, when you mouse over here, it should say HE pen is this, and then AP overmatch, which is the equivalent of HE pen, is this, but it doesn't, and I have no idea why. It's a mechanic that exists in the game that isn't explained in the game at all, and probably 95% of the player base aren't aware that it's a thing. I would actually love to know what percentage of the player base are aware that Overmatch exists. I bet it's really low. Overmatch is, yeah, well, Overmatch isn't good or bad. Overmatch is just a mechanic. So if you overmatch a ship, yes, that is a good thing. But it's going to vary depending on what you're shooting at, right? So if you're a 457 millimeter high tier battleship, you can't overmatch 32 millimeter noses, but you can overmatch 25 and 27 millimeter noses. But you can't overmatch 50 millimeter plating that some battleships have on their noses. So it depends what you're shooting at, and learning some of these figures. You don't have to learn everything, but learning some of the big handful stuff is going to be really helpful. Overmatch is per armor element. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but this set of calculations. So the set of calculations, and this is something that you can learn through watching this video, the armor video. If you go through a plate, those set of calculations, so the overmatch calculation, the bounce calculation, the penetration calculation, the fuse calculation, all of those calculations that happen in order, they happen for every plate the shell hits. So if you go through 4 plates and out the other side of the ship, like 4 calculations have been done. In through the first plate, in through the second plate, in through the third plate, out through the other side. Each one of those has a separate pen calculation. And the shell loses penetration as it goes through, AP specifically. HE works differently, and SAP is a combination of the two. But there are 3 videos that cover the 3 different shell types. Yeah, absolutely. So what you can do, if you look at the armor scheme, don't know why I just turned that off. If you look at the armor scheme and you take the nose off, you can see what's behind, right? So if I overmatch 26, so if I'm a Nelson shooting a Nelson, or a whatever, so I'm a North Cal shooting a Nelson. If I overmatch 26, I go straight through this like it's not there. But that 26 millimeters that I've just gone through, and actually it's not actually 26 millimeters, it's the thickness of the armor as it's presented. And so if you have an armor plate, if you're going straight through, the thickness is 26. But as you turn that armor plate, it becomes thicker, right? So the distance between here and here gets more depending on the angle of the armor. And so it's not this distance that gets deducted, it's whatever angle you're going through at, that distance gets deducted. But the shell, when it arrives at the first plate, will have a certain amount of penetration power. More math. Has a certain amount of penetration power, and as you pass through the first plate, that thickness gets deducted. So in this case, it's not going to be 26 millimeters because the plate is angled. It's going to be something more than 26 millimeters, depending on the angle of the plate. But you're going to have some left, because if you're a battleship shell, you have hundreds of millimeters of pen, not tens of millimeters of pen. And so it's going to have still quite a lot of penetration left. And if I take the nose off, what's behind this plate is 305 millimeter Citadel athwartship. There's a Citadel arm plate there. There's a 152 millimeter plate there, and then you've got a bit of sort of casemate 32. So if you're imagining, if I put this on a water map so you can see what it looks like when you're actually shooting at it. So you can see the waterline there. So what you'd be seeing is that. Okay. So you're aiming here. And so your shells, depending on your range, are going to come down at maybe like that angle. And obviously, like the closer you are, the flatter the angle. So maybe if I'm at a little bit of distance, they're going to be dipping down slightly. And so if I'm aiming for the point of the nose, the likely plate that they're going to hit is going to be this one here. So that's 305 millimeters. Maybe some of them will hit this one. Maybe some of them will hit this one. But this is a 305 millimeter plate. But now, because that plate is flat to me, now bounce angles come in, right? So, and because it's flat to me, I'm within, and this is something that I haven't covered yet, this plate has a cone. You think of it as a flat pie chart, but it's actually a 3D cone. So where the shell hits, there's a cone of angles emanating out from the plate. And if the plate is, we'll make it 2D to make it simple. So if you're shooting across the water surface, there's an angle that looks like that. It's a 90-degree angle for most AP shells. There's a 90, it's not the same for everything. There's a 90-degree angle, 45 on this side and 45 on that side. If we're within that angle, which actually is a cone, but we'll think about it as an angle. If you're within that 90-degree angle, 45 on each side, you will not bounce. It is impossible for your shell to bounce, and the only calculation that happens next is whether you go through the plate or not. So if I've gone through the 26 millimeter nose at an angle, because I overmatch, and the whatever millimeters has been taken off, let's say 50, and I started with 400 millimeters of pen, which is a value that changes with distance, and you cannot find it anywhere in the game. So let's say we started with 400, take off 50, that leaves 350. I cannot bounce because I'm perpendicular, so I have 350 millimeters of pen left. Will I go through this plate? Yes. Okay. Notice that's exactly what I just explained. You don't have to explain what I'm explaining it. So, so you're going to lose some of the pen when you go through here. You'll have some left, but how much you have left depends on how close you are. So let's go and look at that. So that is also available information, right? So if I go to WOW's FT, for example, there are other tools available, but this is a good one. So let me go to here, and we'll go to artillery chart. We went through this a little bit earlier with a different example. And I go to UK, I go to battleship, I go to premium. We go to Nelson, that's what we're looking at, add to comparison. And this is going to give us an artillery chart. This information, not available anywhere in the game. So let's say we're at 12 kilometers from the other Nelson that we're shooting. So at 12 kilometers approximately, we have about 330 millimeters. Okay. What is considered Citadel? If you mouse over, it tells you. I'll go back and show you in a second. So at 12 kilometers, we have 330 millimeters of pen. This is really, really important, because what this means is at 12 kilometers, with the example I just gave, so let's say that this 26 millimeter plating at more than 45 degrees takes off 50. Okay, 50. That means that I have 280 millimeters of pen left after I've gone through the nose. When I hit this, what is going to happen if I have 280 millimeters and I'm hitting a perpendicular plate? Answers in chat, please. So I'm hitting it. Let's just assume that it's a straight 90-degree impact. I have 280 millimeters of pen and I'm hitting a 305 millimeter plate. Broken shell. Yes, you will shatter. But because there's lots of yelling, because the shell is inside the ship and it has a fuse, yes, it will shatter, but it will detonate and you will get a pen in the nose section. So you'll get a third damage because you got a full pen. Okay. Whereas, for example, if you shot the nose and you go through both sides, you'll get only a 10th damage because your shell just basically made a hole and then detonated outside the ship. Okay. However, if I bring my graph back, let's say we're at point blank range. Let's say we're literally nose to nose and I have just enough depression to shoot the nose of the other ship. Let's say it's about 4 kilometers, which is point blank range in World of Warships terms. So at 4 kilometers, I have 532 millimeters. 532. So if the nose takes off about 50, that still leaves me with about 480, 90, something like that. And that is easily going to go through that citadel plate. And so what you'll find if you go into a training room and you put a Nelson versus a Nelson, or any other 406mm versus 26mm nose situation, you will find that if you start off at a long distance, you will go through the nose and get a full pen on the front of the nose. But as you get closer and closer and closer and closer, you will find a distance where suddenly you can pen that citadel front plate, and you will get a citadel because your shell goes through the second plate as well. Okay. That's a completely different topic that we're not discussing. Notice. Like when you're teaching, like I'm a qualified teacher. Let me give you a teaching lesson. When you're teaching someone a new concept, don't give them everything at once. I know you want to, but don't. It's counterproductive. You need to feed the topic a little bit at a time. Let the person digest the first piece of information and then give them the next part. It's a shatter, but it's a shatter inside the ship. So you think about it, like the explosive charge has been delivered into the ship and it stops inside this compartment. It doesn't really matter whether it bounces, whether it shatters, as long as it stays inside the compartment, it's going to go boom. And if it goes boom, you get a pen. What could happen, for example, is you're shooting the side of the nose, you pen the side of the nose, you hit the front of the citadel plating, you bounce off, and you pen out of the other side of the nose. That's an overpen, because you've gone boink, boink, and you've exploded over here. Okay? Pens doing as much damage as overpens can happen. It depends on the caliber. So if you're a battleship shooting a cruiser, for example, it doesn't matter whether you pen or overpen, your damage is artificially limited to 10%. The boundary for that, if I remember correctly, is 283 millimeters, something like that. Someone will correct me. So there are certain guns which have that artificial limitation, and there are certain guns which do not have that artificial limitation. Destroyer. Did I say cruiser? Sorry, I meant destroyer. Sorry, apologies. If you're a battleship or a large caliber cruiser shooting a destroyer, then your shells are artificially limited to 10% damage as a way of making the destroyer not just go. That wasn't always that case. Yak's gang gave up. Yeah, exactly. Boink boom good. Boink boink boom bad. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so to do it from the side, just to reiterate that point. So if I'm shooting this, so if I'm here, off the screen obviously, but if I'm sitting here in my Nelson, 406 millimeters, and I come in through here. Overmatch doesn't matter because I would pen anyway at this angle. So I come in through here. An overmatch calculation is done. It's still done, but an overmatch calculation is done. In fact, I do overmatch, but it doesn't matter. I go through the plate, but then I hit this plate at a very high angle, and I don't overmatch this plate because this is a very thick plate. So, and I'm definitely at this angle, I am definitely in its auto bounce angle. Okay, so 30 degrees from flat, around 30 degrees for a standard AP shell is the auto bounce angle. I'm definitely within that, so there's no chance of it penning, I just bounce straight off. And so I will pen this side, and I will bounce off, but the shell is still going, and it still has some penetration. And approximately 26 millimeters has been removed from the penetration. At short range, I'm going to have several hundred millimeters of pen. So I'm then hitting this side of the nose, again, almost flat. Do I overmatch 26 millimeters? Yes. Do I pen at that angle? It doesn't really matter, but yes, I do.
Drink.
And so I go straight outside the other side. And so that would be an overpen. Even though it's bounced off the citadel, it's still an overpen. And that would look, in terms of the ribbons and the damage, that will look exactly the same as if I just shoot here and go straight through. Okay, so donk donk bang is the same as donk bounce donk bang, to use Hybrid's method. I like Hybrid's method. The auditory method of penetration mechanics. Donk donk bang. Yes. So how do you apply this fact? So this is where the applied mechanics comes in. So if I'm
Brand new
Nelson,
tier 1 sub.
hey, thank
Welcome
you.
Notisolati
Thank
data.
No disalati data. I love the way he says that. Thank you very much for the brand new sub. That's very kind of you. So if you're a 406 millimeter battleship facing a 26 millimeter nose, which you would be if you're facing yourself in a Nelson, how do you apply that knowledge? Well, if you're 406 millimeters, you overmatch it, and so you want to be kind of as flat as possible, because the plating that you're worried about isn't this one, because you overmatch this. It literally doesn't matter what angle you hit this at. You're going through like butter. What you want to try and do is get a pen angle on this thing, because you don't overmatch this, but you really want to pen it. And so you want to make sure that when you shoot the nose of a Nelson, that you are within its don't bounce angle, which is 90 degrees, 45 degrees either side of the keel. Okay, so draw a line like this, draw a line like this, and then make an angle between it. That's the angle that you need to be in order to pen the citadel, guaranteed. Okay, assuming you don't take off too much pen with the nose. The other thing is that you need to aim for the citadel. So if I'm sitting over here, for example, let's put the nose back on, and I aim here, what's going to happen? I'm going to go straight through this nose like butter and out the other side, and my shells are going to end up in here, because that's not where the citadel is. So I need to make sure that I'm aiming here. And this is why Yamato has a cheek. It's because if you go to Yamato, and there are a couple of other ships that have the same thing, but if I go to Yamato, classic example, where's my Yamato? Helps if you deselect the tier stats. So Yamato has this sort of hexagonal front to the citadel, and this makes it ridiculously easy to citadel, because instead of going through the nose and trying to hit this plate at the front, you can go through the side. So if you overmatch the 32 millimeter plating on a Yamato, you can do this really, really easily, because it doesn't matter what angle you hit that nose at, you're going to go through it, and then you just need to not bounce on this. So you need to get a 45 degree off the perpendicular angle on here. So if you're another Yamato, you can do this at an even shallower angle. But if you're not a Yamato, or a whatever, 460 millimeter plus battleship that overmatches this, if you're a lower caliber, let's say you're a North Cal, 406 millimeters, you need to, in order to cheek a Yamato in a North Cal, you need to make sure that you can pen the nose, because you don't overmatch this. So you need to pen this properly. So perpendicular to this nose, just in front of the citadel plate, you need to, perpendicular to the plate, not the ship, you need to draw a 45-degree angle coming out each side, so 90 degrees. That is your, assuming you're not in a Stalingrad or something, which has a narrower angle. 45 degrees either side, that's your pen angle. There's also a little wedge either side of that, which is your, you might bounce, you might not bounce. Ideally, don't try and be in that. So assuming you are in that 45-degree each side wedge, you're not going to bounce, and so it's only penetration that matters. Will your North Cal guns pen 32? Yes, they will. So you will go through that first plate if you've got the right angle. Next plate is this, which you are also almost perpendicular to. Now, and the only question left is, do your shells at that range, after going through the 32mm at an angle nose, maybe that removed 40, 50 mil, do you have 200 and, you know, how much pen do you have left? Did you start with 400? If you started with 400 when you hit the outer plate, you're going to be just on the verge probably of being able to pen. If you started with 350, you're not going to pen. And what's going to happen is you're going to go through the nose and your shell will explode inside here. If you do have enough pen, if you had like 600, because you were really, really close, then you're going to go straight through this, you're going to go straight through this. You're not necessarily going to stop. So you have to consider what's going on in here. So you might possibly, on some ships, go straight through the citadel and out the other side, especially cruisers. In this case, probably not, because 350 mil, that takes off a lot more penetration. Your shell doesn't have very much penetration left, and it essentially just rattles around inside the citadel box and goes bang. There's another factor, which is fuse time. So it is possible in certain circumstances that your shell might have gone all the way through the ship, especially if it's a cruiser, but doesn't because you have a fuse time which explodes inside the ship. And some ships have shorter fuses than others, particularly British AP. End of lecture.